The stars burned cold above Luna Station, their light distant and uncaring, as Captain Aidan Ross stood alone in the shattered command dome, staring out through the fractured glass at the black void. Earth was dying behind him, the home world, a blue and brown blur choked with smoke and silence, its proud voice silenced by betrayal. Not by the enemy, but by its own so-called allies. The Zarn Dominion had attacked without mercy, tearing through defenses like a hot blade through paper, and the Galactic Council, who had promised to stand with Earth in its darkest hour, had instead turned their backs, branding the planet a strategic loss and cutting all aid. The Terran Defense Pact, once a proud alliance, had crumbled in moments, and with it, every illusion of unity. Ross had watched helplessly as orbital defense grids fell, as thousands of ships burned in the atmosphere, as cries for help went unanswered. The fleet he once commanded was gone, scattered or destroyed. His friends, his comrades, dead. The SAR, last transmission from Earth's president, had ended in static and fire. Now, all that remained were ashes, and the ghosts of promises made too easily. Yet deep in the silence of Luna's wreckage, something stirred. Not all of Earth's hope had died. Hidden far beneath the ice and rock of Antarctica, long forgotten by most, was Project Revenant, a final contingency prepared in secret when the first cracks in the Council's loyalty began to show. It had been called a myth, a paranoid relic of the past, but Ross knew better. He remembered the whispers in the war rooms, the encrypted briefings, the fragments of AI protocols only certain captains could access. As the emergency beacon triggered in his neural implant, he felt a familiar pull, like gravity, like destiny. He was being called, not to surrender, not to hide, but to awaken something powerful, something dangerous, something human. Behind him, debris floated in zero gravity, flickering with sparks. Ahead, Earth turned slowly, wounded but alive. And below, under a world that had been left for dead, an ancient fleet waited in the dark, still powered, still silent, still loyal. The galaxy had abandoned them, but Earth would rise again, not in desperation, but in vengeance. Ross turned from the broken dome, his eyes sharp and cold. The stars could keep their lies. Humanity would no longer beg for help. They would become the storm. Beneath the frozen surface of Antarctica, hidden far below layers of ice and steel, the heart of Earth's final hope began to beat once more, slow and steady like the awakening of a sleeping giant, as Captain Aidan Ross descended into the depths of the old world, following the call of the ghost signal that had triggered in his neural link back on Luna Station, his boots echoing against cold metal as he passed through dark tunnels and forgotten chambers, their lights flickering to life after years of silence, responding to his genetic code, to his presence, to the authority encoded in his blood, a key left behind by those who had seen the betrayal coming long before it arrived, those who had planned for the day when the stars would turn their backs on Earth, and now that day had come, just as they feared, and only those who remembered the old ways, the hidden ways, could bring the last weapon back online. Project Revenant, a fleet not built for show or diplomacy, but for survival, for revenge, for the defense of humanity without permission from the galaxy that had so easily abandoned it. And as Ross stepped through the final gate, the vast chamber opened before him, massive and quiet, like a tomb of giants, rows upon rows of sleek black ships hanging in darkness, untouched by war, their hulls glinting faintly under the blue emergency lights, and in that moment he felt both awe and sorrow. For this fleet was not meant to be used in peace. It was a weapon forged for a last stand. And now it was time to see if the steel still remembered how to strike, as AI voices began to stir, whispering through the air, identifying him, recognizing his command, offering status updates in clipped tones, systems green, weapons charged, quantum drives online, waiting only for orders, waiting only for a captain. And Ross walked among them like a ghost in a graveyard, remembering the faces of those who had helped design this place, men and women who had disappeared without explanation. Now he understood why. They had gone into the shadows to build the one thing Earth might one day need if trust ever failed. And now that day had come, and he was not alone, because others had heard the signal too. Scattered survivors, exiled captains, rogue commanders who had refused to surrender, were converging on the hidden base one by one, drawn by that same echo. From the deep, bringing with them old ships, damaged and battered, ready to be reforged and reborn. And as Ross climbed the bridge of the Revenant-class flagship, the Vindicator, he felt the command seat welcome him, scanning his vitals, syncing his memories to the central AI, a deep male voice speaking for the first time in decades. "Captain, on deck." And the lights of the ship surged brighter, systems fully awakening, reactors humming with new life. And as the hangars opened to the surface, ancient towers broke through the ice, disguised as old research stations, now revealing themselves as launch spires. Satellite dishes spinning to full rotation, sending out secure codes across hidden frequencies to whatever human colonies still lived, and one answered. Not Earth, but Vega 9, a colony thought destroyed in the first wave of the Zarn attacks. Their signal broken and weak, filled with static, but one message clear. Help us. They're coming. And Ross looked around at the fleet, no longer asleep, no longer forgotten, but ready, each ship bearing the old Earth sigil, the one that hadn't been used since before the Council forced Earth to adopt their banner. And he gave the order to prepare for launch. Engines lighting up beneath the ice like the sun rising under snow, the ground rumbling as the first dreadnoughts broke free, silent sentinels rising into the stormy skies, disappearing into orbit without notice, cloaked, fast, unstoppable. And as the Vindicator followed them, Ross stared at the stars, not with wonder, but with purpose, because now he knew the truth. Humanity had never truly belonged to the Council, and Earth had never needed their approval to survive, and now that survival would begin with a reckoning, and whatever waited at Vega 9, he would meet it not with fear, but with fire, because the Revenant fleet had returned, and the galaxy would learn what it meant to leave Earth for dead. The stars above Vega 9 were dull and red, flickering like dying embers as Captain Aiden Ross stood on the bridge of the Vindicator, staring at the shattered world below, its once bright cities now black scars across the landscape, its air thick with ash and silence, and all around him his fleet hovered like ghosts, silent, cloaked, and watching. As the broken signal from the surface continued to play in the background, a human voice lost in static, repeating the same desperate words, "Help us. They're coming." And though it had taken days to trace the origin, to bypass the jamming fields that flickered like poison around the planet's orbit, they had finally found the source, hidden deep underground beneath what remained of New Vega's capital, a faint energy signature surrounded by collapsed buildings and a wasteland of burnt metal. And as the crew scanned the area, they found something even more disturbing, Zarn technology woven into the wreckage, not just weapons, but biological machines, hybrid constructs that looked half living, half metal, their twisted forms scattered across the ruins like broken bones, and some still moved, twitching faintly even after death, which meant the Zarn hadn't just attacked, they had experimented, and as the Vindicator's scout drones flew lower, capturing the horror in high detail, Ross clenched his jaw, remembering the stories from the early war, stories the Council had dismissed as propaganda. Stories of entire colonies not just destroyed but harvested, altered, reshaped into something no longer human. And now here was the proof, lying in the dust, and worse still, the AI detected signs of movement below, life signs, hundreds of them, all clustered in narrow tunnels far under the surface, and Ross made his decision quickly, ordering a landing team to assemble, choosing only those who had seen war, who had nothing left to lose. And he led them himself, stepping into the dropship with a grim look and a heavy rifle in his hands, because this was no longer just a rescue mission. It was a reckoning, and as they descended through fire-colored clouds, the surface came into view, an open graveyard of war, filled with silence and ash, and the faint whisper of the wind carrying the scent of burnt flesh and metal. And the dropship touched down, hard on a cracked landing pad surrounded by twisted towers that leaned like broken fingers toward the sky, and the squad moved quickly, sweeping the area, guns ready, eyes sharp, while Ross followed the signal deeper into the ruins, using his neural implant to guide them until they reached the mouth of a sealed access shaft, half collapsed, but still intact, and with effort, they opened it, descending into darkness lit only by their shoulder lamps and the glowing symbols on the tunnel walls. Alien patterns etched into steel, signs of the Zarn's infection spreading like veins. And deeper they went, hearing faint noises echo in the dark, scraping, whispering, something not quite human. And then they reached the chamber, a large underground shelter still powered by flickering emergency lights. And inside were survivors, dirty, thin, scared, but alive, huddled behind makeshift barricades, their eyes wide with shock as they saw Ross and his team, and one woman, a medic by her armband, ran forward, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the back, where makeshift beds lined the walls. And children slept in silence, and she whispered, "They're changing us. The ones they took. They brought them back, but they're not the same." And as if on cue, a low growl came from the far tunnel, and something stepped into the light. Once human, now not. Its skin laced with glowing veins, its eyes empty and glassy, and it screamed, a sound that didn't belong to any species Ross had ever known. And the squad opened fire without hesitation, cutting it down. But more came, crawling from vents and walls, dozens of them, and the fight turned brutal, close, fast, and in the chaos Ross saw what the Zarn had done. Not just killed humanity, but stolen it, twisted it, turned it into weapons. And he realized this was never about victory. It was about erasure. And as they fought their way out, dragging survivors with them, he called for extraction, the Vindicator's guns raining fire on the surface above, clearing a path, and by the time they returned to orbit, 30 more lives had been saved, but hundreds had been lost, and the medic, her name was Dr. Alira Voss, gave Ross something she had recovered from the ruins, a data core hidden in the remains of an old diplomatic relay, and when they decoded it showed something unexpected, a transmission from the Galactic Council itself, dated before Earth's fall, marked with a secure seal. And it was not a warning, not a call for unity, but a deal. Coordinates, tactical data, even lists of human outposts, given to the Zarn in exchange for peace treaties and territory rights. And Ross felt the air leave his lungs as he read the final line. Earth's loss is unfortunate, but acceptable. And now he understood. This wasn't just betrayal. It was sacrifice. A cold choice made in polished rooms by people who saw humanity as disposable, and that choice had left billions dead, and Vega 9 as nothing more than a lab for monsters. And now that the truth was known, there was no going back. And Ross knew what had to come next, not just war, but exposure. The truth sent out into the stars, and as the Vindicator's comm system sent the files across secure black channels to rogue colonies, pirate bands, and anyone who still remembered Earth, a quiet fire began to burn in the dark corners of the galaxy, a whisper spreading fast. Earth lives, and it remembers. And Ross looked at the stars ahead, knowing the road would only get harder, that the Council would strike back, that more horrors waited. But he didn't flinch, because the Revenant fleet was no longer a secret. It was a message, and that message was simple. Humanity had survived, and it would never beg again. Far beyond the burning sky of Vega 9, Captain Aiden Ross stood at the center of the Vindicator's command deck, his eyes fixed on the slowly unfolding message relay stretching across multiple channels, watching as the stolen data from Vega's underground shelter transmitted to scattered colonies, rogue Earth loyalists, and secret listening posts hidden in asteroid belts. The truth about the Galactic Council's betrayal moving like wildfire through systems that had not heard Earth's name in years, and as the wave of information reached them, messages began flooding back. Some shocked, some furious, others silent, but watching, listening, learning the truth that Earth had been sold for peace, traded away like scrap for diplomatic safety. The Council signing its death warrant with cold words and hidden meetings while pretending to mourn its fall, and Ross felt a storm rising in the dark corners of the galaxy because the illusion was breaking. The cracks spreading as more people read the files, saw the video clips, watched the horror the Zarn had done to human colonies with Council knowledge, and while many systems stayed quiet, still afraid of the Council's reach, some began to speak, whispers turning to questions, and questions turning to blame. And Ross knew it was working, that the lie was dying, but the Council would not go down without a fight, and they proved that quickly, as a transmission came through 2 days later, sharp and full of authority, bearing the seal of High Chancellor Varric himself, the Council's voice wrapped in practiced calm as he called Ross a traitor, a destabilizing force, a threat to peace and unity, and ordered the Revenant fleet to disband immediately and turn over all classified technology to Council control, promising forgiveness for cooperation and swift punishment for resistance. But Ross simply watched the message in silence, then deleted it, knowing it wasn't a warning. It was a declaration of war, and the response came within hours, as Council ships moved against one of the last known free human settlements on the edge of the Targan Belt, hoping to crush them before more joined Ross's cause. And without hesitation, the Revenant fleet set course, moving faster than anyone expected, arriving in system through a hidden quantum fold gate built decades ago during Earth's rise. And what they found was chaos, the settlement under siege, Council warships firing from orbit, dropping ground troops by the hundreds, their banners showing peace, but their guns silencing anyone who spoke against them. And Ross didn't wait for orders or permission. He gave the command, engage at will, and the Revenant ships decloaked in orbit like shadows pulling back from the sun, sleek and black with blue flame trailing behind them, and they struck without warning, cutting through the Council fleet. With precision, their weapons more advanced, their crews sharper, their will unbroken, and in minutes the attackers were scattered or burning, the ground troops scrambling as Revenant dropships landed, releasing soldiers in dark armor marked with the old Earth flag, and the people cheered when they saw them, not out of fear, but hope, because they remembered those colors, that symbol, the home they thought lost. And Ross walked among them after the battle, shaking hands, listening to stories, hearing names of children taken, of families lost to Zarn harvesters while the Council promised peace, and he promised them they were not alone anymore. That Earth's voice was not silenced, and from the Council's shattered base, they recovered another piece of proof. A black box filled with logs, audio files of meetings where high officials admitted to sacrificing frontier colonies to maintain order, and one even spoke of Earth like a decayed limb, saying it had to be cut off to keep the galaxy healthy. And Ross broadcast that clip across all channels, and this time, the reaction was louder. Entire stations went dark, their governments resigning. Pirate fleets began offering escort to human vessels. Even some Council soldiers began defecting, leaving their posts to join Revenant units, their oaths broken by the truth, and the Council responded with fury, naming Ross the leader of a terrorist fleet, issuing bounty orders across all systems, placing a price on his head higher than any in recorded history, and assassins began hunting him, mercenary ships trailing his movements, but they failed again and again, their tactics useless against Revenant's stealth and unity. And still, Ross pushed forward, gathering strength, not to conquer, but to expose, to show that Earth had not died, it had been murdered, and now it had returned with its eyes open, its weapons ready, and a fire that no Council words could extinguish. And yet Ross knew something darker stirred beneath the surface, because not all enemies were open. And as the fleet moved toward the edge of the Orion Veil, chasing down rumors of another abandoned colony taken by the Zarn, they intercepted a strange signal. Council code, but twisted, corrupted, pulsing in strange patterns, and when decrypted, it showed more than orders. It showed fear, panic in Council voices as they spoke of something hidden in the dead sectors, something they had given the Zarn in exchange for peace, something they could no longer control. And Ross felt the weight of what was coming, heavier than politics or pride. Because now it wasn't just about vengeance or justice, it was about stopping whatever they had unleashed. And the shame of the Council wasn't just a story of betrayal, it was a warning, and unless the Revenant fleet could act fast, it might be humanity's last. The edge of the Orion Veil was darker than any part of space Captain Aiden Ross had seen, not because there were no stars, but because something beyond the stars was wrong, something cold and silent that didn't belong in normal space. And as the Vindicator and the rest of the Revenant fleet drifted closer to the source of the strange Council signal they had intercepted, the sensors began to show impossible readings, energy spikes that didn't match any known weapon, gravity, distortions twisting the space around them, and fragments of dead ships floating like torn paper caught in a storm. Some of them clearly Council vessels, others marked with symbols no one recognized, their hulls blackened and warped, as if melted from the inside. And Ross stood at the main console watching the ghostly scene unfold, his crew tense, his command silent, the quiet broken only by the slow pulse of warning tones from the AI as the ship's systems struggled to define what they were seeing. And then came the signal again, louder this time, not just a cry for help, but a code, Council Black. Protocol, Level 0, something so secret it had only existed in theory, and now it was broadcasting on repeat. Containment breached. All assets compromised. Repeat, do not approach. But it was too late for warnings, because the Revenant fleet was already here, already inside the veil. And as they pushed deeper into the shadow zone, they found what the Council had tried to hide, a broken station the size of a small moon, hidden behind a dead planet. Its surface cracked open like an egg, massive holes blown through its core, and inside those wounds, something moved, slow and massive, like roots of metal and flesh stretching out into space, pulsing with red light, and Ross felt a chill run down his spine as he realized this was no simple base. This had been a lab, or maybe a prison, built to hold something the Council had discovered and made a deal to hide, and now it had escaped. And as the Revenant scans reached deeper, they picked up a structure at the heart of the wreck, a sphere of impossible material, something that shimmered and shifted, warping light. And from within it came a frequency that no human ear could hear, but every crew member felt, an unease, a pressure, a presence watching them. And Ross gave the order to send drones, to explore, without risking lives. But the moment the first drone crossed the threshold into the structure's gravity field, it vanished. Not exploded, not shot down, just disappeared, as if it had been swallowed by reality itself. And then the sphere reacted, sending out a pulse that lit the entire veil in crimson fire, a wave of heat and energy that knocked out half their systems and revealed something terrible behind the shadows. Ships, dozens of them, Zarn ships, but twisted, changed, their shapes, unnatural, growing tendrils of dark matter. And in the center of them all, a single massive creature, larger than anything Ross had ever seen, part machine, part organism, its body wrapped in coils of dead ships, glowing with stolen power, and the AI whispered the only word it could find in the ancient database. Nullborn, a name given to a myth. A creature said to be the Zarn's failed god, abandoned in ancient war, hidden away in the deepest part of space. And Ross knew in that moment the Council hadn't made a deal with the Zarn for peace. They had given them this prison, hoping to buy time, to delay a war they could never win. And now the prison was broken, and the Nullborn was awake. And it had remembered who had locked it away, and it wanted revenge not just on the Council, but on everything human, everything living. And as the fleet prepared for battle, Ross knew they couldn't win in a normal fight, not against something that fed on energy, that twisted space and turned ships into nightmares. But they had one advantage. The Revenant fleet had been designed for final wars, for extinction-level threats, and deep in its core systems was a protocol never tested, codenamed Prometheus Burn, a last-resort weapon powered by singularity drives and ancient dark energy tech Earth had hidden long ago, and activating it meant burning the entire system, down, including themselves. But Ross didn't hesitate, because this wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about stopping what the Council had started, ending what they were too afraid to face. And as the Revenant ship surged forward in a wedge formation, engaging the twisted Zarn vessels with full force, the sky lit up with fire, the silence of the veil shattered by cannon blasts, missile, Trails, plasma storms ripping through the void, and in the middle of the storm, the Vindicator dove toward the center, carrying the Prometheus core, its engines screaming, its hull tearing under pressure. Ross locked into his seat, watching the Nullborn grow larger on the screen, its tendrils reaching out like a spider sensing prey, and just before impact, just before the core ignited, Ross sent one last message through the quantum net. Earth remembers. This ends now. And then the darkness lit up brighter than a star, a firestorm of light and gravity tearing the system apart, folding the structure into itself, dragging the Nullborn back into the void from which it came. And when the light faded, only wreckage remained, silent, empty, scorched. And for a long moment, there was only silence, until a few revenant ships limped out of the destruction, scarred but alive, carrying the survivors and the story of what had happened. And though Ross was gone, his name carried through the fleet, through the colonies, through the whispers of rebels and free people across the stars, not as a martyr, but as the man who faced the Council's greatest sin and burned it from the sky. And now the fire over. Orion had become a symbol, not of death, but of warning, a reminder that Earth had been left for dead, but had returned stronger, fiercer and unafraid of any darkness, and wherever the Council hid next, they would never forget the light that burned in the void. The survivors of the fire over Orion drifted silently through the wreckage of the destroyed Nullborn prison, the black void filled with broken metal, ruined Zarn vessels, and the ghostly remains of the Vindicator, which had burned bright and vanished in the final blast that sealed away the ancient threat. And though Captain Aiden Ross was gone, his name echoed across every channel, his last words, Earth remembers. This ends now, becoming a rallying cry for humans across the galaxy who had lived in silence and shame for too long. And now those words reached even the heart of the galactic core, where the Council tried to hold their crumbling authority. Together as the truth bled into every system, but they were losing control, and in desperation, they unleashed their final weapon. Protocol Omega, an emergency act hidden beneath layers of old wartime code, authorizing a full planetary lockdown of all outer colonies and the deployment of the Omega Guard, a secret force no one had seen in decades, bred in darkness, trained in silence, loyal only to the core, and as these black-armored warriors spread like a storm across the fringe, executing resistance leaders, cutting off supplies, and shutting down independent networks, the final loyalist strongholds began to fall, and Earth's surviving fleet, the scattered pieces of the Revenant Armada, knew they had to make a stand. Not at the edge, but at the center, and so they gathered at Proxima Bastion, an old defense ring built before Earth fell, hidden in the shadows of a dead binary star, its systems dormant but intact, a fortress built for a final war no one had expected to come, and now it would be their last line, the place where they would make their stand, not just for revenge, but for freedom. And as Commander Elira Voss stepped onto the control deck of the newly restored battleship Solaris Ascend, now the flagship of the remnants, she stared at the incoming fleet markers, dozens of Council dreadnoughts, support carriers, and Omega Guard strike groups all converging on the same point. And though outnumbered, outgunned, and running low on supplies, she didn't flinch, because she had seen what true evil looked like on Vega 9, had fought beside Ross through the veil, and now she would carry his fire forward, and her voice rang out over the fleet, clear and steady, as she gave the order to hold the line, to dig in, to prepare for one last battle that would decide if humanity rose or vanished again. And so the ships aligned, forming a wall of steel and light around Proxima Bastion, ancient guns reactivated, automated turrets humming to life, mines laid in, overlapping fields, and the engineers worked without rest, repairing, upgrading, pushing old machines beyond their limits, while the civilians hidden deep inside the Bastion's core waited in silence, children listening to the hum of power returning, the breath of a sleeping giant waking up. And then the enemy came, black ships sliding out of fold space like teeth through a wound, Omega fighters flooding ahead, and the battle began, not with a shout, but a shockwave, as the first strike turned half the outer defenses to fire. But the Revenant fleet didn't move, didn't retreat. They held, their formation locking like a shield, their gunners picking off attackers with precision, and for every ship that fell, another stepped forward, and for hours the battle raged, a storm of light and metal, and inside the chaos, Voss guided her crew like a knife, diving through weak points, slamming council cruisers into wreckage, launching coordinated strikes that tore holes in the enemy ranks, and slowly, impossibly, the tide began to turn, not because of power, but because of will, because the Revenants had something the council couldn't understand: hope, memory, the strength of a broken people standing together, and even as more ships fell, more came to join them. Rogue colonies, deserting soldiers, even a few alien allies who had once stood with Earth long ago, all drawn by the call, the signal broadcast from the heart of Proxima Bastion. Earth lives, Earth fights, and in the chaos, a final transmission broke through the enemy network. A council override, a desperate voice, High Chancellor Varric himself, offering surrender terms, trying to buy time, to end the battle before total collapse, but Voss didn't even respond, because they weren't there to talk anymore, and the fleet pushed forward, breaching the enemy lines, boarding the command carrier, and in the final moments, the Bastion's superweapon fired, an ancient solar lance powered by the dead star's core, a beam of light so bright it cut the night in two, vaporizing the last of the Omega Guard ships and leaving nothing behind but silence. And in that silence, the fleet stood victorious, wounded, broken, but free, and across the galaxy. The council crumbled, its leaders scattered, its lies exposed, and a new age began, not ruled by fear, but built by those who had survived, who had fought, who had remembered, and at the heart of it all, Proxima Bastion stood as a monument, a scar, and a promise that humanity would never again be left behind, that the last line had held, and now the stars belonged to them once more. Beneath the cold light of the dead star, the ruins of the Council's last fleet drifted like broken bones scattered across the grave of an empire. But the war was far from over, and Commander Elira Voss knew it, because though the Council had fallen, the galaxy was still full of wounds, old enemies in hiding, rogue AIs waking from hibernation, scavenger kings seizing lost colonies, and, worst of all, reports had started to spread again about Zarn movement near the outer rims, this time without ships or banners, but in quiet signals, strange disappearances, and dead systems where once thriving planets had gone completely silent. And Voss had barely a moment to rest after the last battle, when the warning came from a deep scout unit sent beyond the veil. An automated distress ping, pulsing weakly from a system thought uninhabitable, known in old Earth records as Solara V. A system once stripped clean by solar storms until only the husk of a collapsed star remained. And though many believed nothing could survive there, the signal was human, marked with revenant codes. But older, much older, and it bore the name Prometheus Omega, a code tied to Aiden Ross's final mission. Thought lost when he died during the Nullborn explosion, and when Voss heard it, she froze, because the message was clear. Ross had made a copy of himself, a final contingency stored in a deep quantum vault inside a ghost satellite orbiting the dead star, and that satellite was now active again, broadcasting coordinates and a message. If you are hearing this, then the end has not come yet, but it is near. And without hesitation, Voss gathered what was left of the fleet, calling in every ally who had survived the last campaign, and together they launched toward Solara V, unaware that they were not alone, because someone else had picked up the message too. Council loyalists who had escaped capture, fanatics who believed the Council must rise again at any cost, and more dangerously, a splinter faction of the Zarn, changed after the Nullborn's death, no longer following commands but drawn to the dead star by something ancient, something buried beneath it long ago, and as the Revenant fleet arrived in the system, they saw it all, the dead sun burning like a frozen eye, and near its horizon, the satellite turning slowly, blackened and ancient, its energy readings low but pulsing, and all around it, enemy ships already closing in, not fighting each other, but circling like predators waiting for a target to show weakness. And Voss knew they had walked into a trap, but it was too late to retreat, because whatever was in that satellite, whatever Ross had left behind, It was something the enemy feared, and that meant it was something they had to protect. And so she gave the order to deploy. Revenant fighters bursting forward, engaging Council loyalists in the outer ring, while stealth frigates flanked the strange Zarn vessels, which no longer moved like normal ships but drifted like ghosts, and the battle began without a sound. The blackness lit only by cannon fire and plasma beams cutting across wreckage, ships dancing between asteroid shards and magnetic fields that pulled everything toward the dead star's gravity. And at the heart of the chaos, the Solaris Ascend pressed toward the satellite, taking hit after hit, its shields flaring, its hull groaning under pressure, but it pushed forward, and finally, boarding teams launched, crossing the gulf between flame and silence to reach the satellite's core. And what they found inside was not just data, it was Ross himself, or at least a version of him, stored as a deep AI pattern, built to advise, to guide, to pass on everything he knew, and his voice echoed through the chamber as Voss entered. "You made it." "Good." And though it was only a recording, it felt real, and what Ross revealed made her blood run cold. The Nullborn had not been destroyed, only pushed back into subspace, and the Zarn had been searching for a way to bring it back, using dead stars as anchors. And this one was the last, the key to the prison's gate, and now it was weakening, the walls thinning. And if they didn't stop the ritual hidden in the enemy fleet's core ship, the Nullborn would return stronger, faster, immune to what had stopped it before, and there would be no second chance. And so Voss called all units back, regrouped the fleet into a wedge formation, and charged, not away but toward the enemy, straight at the Zarn dread core that shimmered with dark energy. A thing not made of metal, but of stolen life and echoing screams. And the Revenant fleet struck with everything it had: nuclear lances, EMP bombs, focused gravity torpedoes, and the sky lit up with a fire not seen since Earth burned. And inside the chaos, Voss herself led the final boarding run, charging through corridors that warped and shifted, walls made of flesh and machine. And at the core, she saw it. The growing eye of the Nullborn, half-formed, waiting, watching. And with her last breath, she activated the pulse beacon Ross had stored in the satellite, triggering a quantum collapse inside the enemy ship, a fold implosion that crushed the core in on itself, sealing the gate, and destroying the Zarn vessel in a storm of white light. And when the light cleared, the dead star was silent again, the battlefield quiet, and the Revenants, though bloodied, still stood, the last guardians of a fire that refused to go out. And as they returned to the stars, the satellite shut down, Ross's voice fading into static, but not before he said one final thing. The line held, "Now build something better." And Voss knew that whatever came next, Earth's children would no longer run, because they had faced the dark and won. The galaxy was quiet after the battle of the dead star, but it was not peace, only silence before the storm. Because even though the Nullborn gate had been sealed and the Zarn vessel destroyed, scars remained across space and mind, and Commander Elira Voss knew the war had changed everything. The Council was gone, the core systems broken, old powers vanished or fled, and what remained was chaos, a fractured galaxy waiting for someone to shape what came next. And in that fragile moment, Earth's fleet, once shattered, now stood as the strongest surviving force, not by numbers, not by wealth, but by will. And so the call went out from Proxima Bastion, not a command, not a demand, but a message of hope, a declaration. We are here, we remember, we endure. And colonies from all corners began to respond, some hesitant, some desperate, others defiant. But they listened. And slowly, ships arrived. Not just human, but alien too. Old friends and strange new allies who had once stood silent, who had once turned away when Earth burned, now returning, drawn not by guilt, but by something deeper, respect, maybe even awe, for those who had stood alone and survived. And while the galaxy gathered, the Revenants did not rest. They rebuilt, not just their ships, but the systems around them, forming a new alliance, not ruled by fear or titles, but by unity forged in the fire of forgotten battles. And as this new force took shape, Whispers spread of a second signal buried deep in the satellite Ross had left behind, one no one had noticed before, encrypted and silent, only triggering. Once the core battle had ended, and when Voss accessed it, she found coordinates. An old Earth vault, sealed before the fall, buried beneath the ice of Europa's dark moon, and no record of it remained in the archives, which meant whatever was inside had been meant to be forgotten or protected at all costs. And without hesitation, she led a team to the edge of the Sol system, a place not seen by human eyes in a generation. The planet still scarred, the moon bases dead, but the vault still intact, hidden beneath ancient crust and guarded by an AI defense system that almost fired on them before recognizing their code. And once inside, they found something that changed everything. Records, logs, and technologies from Earth's lost age, things not even the Council had known. And among them, a single message, the very first message ever sent beyond the stars by Earth's founders after the fall. We are the forgotten flame. But if ever the stars call for us, we will answer. And Voss understood then why Ross had done everything he had. He hadn't just wanted to win, he wanted to remind the galaxy of what Earth truly was. Not the rubble left behind, but the spirit that had once reached for the stars without fear, and now, the galaxy had called again, and Earth had answered, not with fleets or pride, but with fire and sacrifice. And though the war had ended, the mission had not, because the echoes of the Nullborn were still out there, hidden in deep space, waiting for weakness, and worse, other ancient threats stirred as power shifted, old empires rising again in secret, building in the dark, watching as Earth's children took their place at the center. And so Voss and the Revenants formed a new vanguard, a force not tied to one planet or system, but to the defense of all free life, and they did not ask for permission, they did not beg for recognition, they simply acted. And wherever fires burned, wherever silence replaced freedom, they went, answering calls that had no voice, no name, only a need for someone to stand, and the symbol they carried, two crossed stars over a rising flame, became more than a mark. It became a warning, a promise, a memory, and across the galaxy stories were told of them, some true, some legend, but all shared one phrase: when the stars forget you, Earth remembers. And children on distant worlds would ask what that meant, and elders would tell them of the time when all hope had died, when the Council turned away, when the skies turned black with ash, and in that moment, when no one else came, Earth answered, and from that answer, the galaxy was reborn.